السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. زي ما وعدت حضراتكم قبل الفاصل اننا هنلتقي في هذا اللقاء اللي اجريته في لندن مع بوب والتر عضو مجلس النواب البريطاني وعضو المجموعة البرلمانية لكل الأحزاب All Party Parliamentary Group اللي فيهم جزء كبير هي بتدعم مصر. لغاية دلوقتي وصلوا ل 42 عضو من البرلمان ومن مجلس اللوردات. مصر عندها أصدقاء، مفيش شك. مصر عندها أصدقاء في كل مكان في العالم. مصر عندها ناس ممكن تقف جنبها وتدافع عن قضيتها. بس ايه اللي مطلوب؟ مطلوب ان مصر مش بس تعرض قضيتها بشكل عادل، مش بس ان مصر توفر المعلومات بشكل وافي، ولكن مطلوب ان مصر تكون كل خطواتها اللي جاية محسوبة ومحسوبة بدقة. كل واحد فينا يعتبر سفير لمصر، مش السفير اللي معين من وزارة الخارجية وحدها، ولكن أي واحد هيطلع يقول جملة باسم مصر لازم يبقى عارف هو بيقول إيه. لازم كل واحد ضميره جوه مصر لازم هيكون بيقول حاجة تتعلق بهذا الموضوع. اللقاء مع بوب والتر اللي كان موجود جوه البرلمان البريطاني العريق، وجزء من التجربة ان احنا شفنا في خلال اللقاء الجرس بيضرب عشان خاطر بوب والتر ينزل جري عشان خاطر يصوت على واحدة من المشروعات القوانين او اعتراض على قرار خارج من مجلس اللوردات ويرجع تاني يكمل. اولا ده معناه العملية الديمقراطية هناك ماشية بشكل هنشوفه مع بعض، ومعناه حرصه ان هو يخاطبنا احنا كمصريين ورأي عام مصري. بذكر حضراتكم ان في خلال الايام اللي جايه بكره وبعده هيكون في مجموعه اخرى من اللقاءات مع وزير الخارجيه المصري في لندن، مع الجاليه المصريه في بريطانيا، مع صحفيين من الصحفيين التقال جدا في الديلي تيليجراف والتايمز هقدمها لحضراتكم. لكن هسيبكم دلوقتي مع هذا اللقاء مع بوب والتر عضو مجلس النواب البريطاني بعد هذا الفاصل.
Mr. Robert Walter, MP, thank you very much for hosting us at your amazingly beautiful office within a beautiful building.
Thank you very much.
You are renowned and known among Egyptians right now as a strong, good friend of Egypt.
Absolutely. I regard myself as a friend of Egypt. That doesn't mean that I have any particular political angle on Egypt, but I want Egypt to survive as a stable country and as a democratic country.
And how did it all start? How did you manage to bring together this understanding of what is happening with Egypt, even though not so many people have developed that understanding that fast?
Well, I think the whole Arab Spring phenomena is something that was on our TV screens here night after night. And what we saw happening in Egypt, in Tahrir Square, was something which fascinated me and I think fascinated many of my colleagues. And we had a great deal of hope from that process. We thought that the Egyptian people were going to turn a new corner. We're going to be able to create a new democratic society. But it's been, I'm afraid, a very difficult road, which you in Egypt know so much about.
Yeah. And then the Egyptian people, this is where they do tend to be grateful to people who understand the point of view. That is, after the 30th of June, things have shifted tremendously in the media in the West, in the points of view of members of parliaments and politicians and so on. And it was only very few people who took the effort to say, I want to study it more, I want to listen more, I want to come and visit and get more of an understanding. How did that happen as well?
Well, that's absolutely right, and I came with a number of my colleagues from the British Parliament to Cairo in January, and we met with the President and the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, and we also met with Field Marshal Sisi, and we were very interested to hear what it was that led him to take the decision that he did to deprive former President Morsi of power. And I think we had a much better understanding as a result of that visit. But we still want to see this come to its true democratic fruition. because if we're not going to be in a position to see Egypt as a country where the majority of the Egyptian people are prepared to back one leader as their president and are prepared to elect a parliament that represents all of their views, then this may not be a successful path. But we live very optimistically, and I think I shall be bringing more colleagues to Cairo in June, some 20 members of the British Parliament, and we will be looking very closely at the way in which you move on from a democratic presidential election to, we hope, democratic parliamentary elections.
So you can foresee a democratic presidential election, but you have your doubts about the parliamentary elections.
We want to be convinced that those parliamentary elections are going to take place, and we also want to be convinced that there will be the opportunity for all Egyptian people to participate in that process. Not, of course, those who wish to undermine the state, but those who want the state to succeed. Because at the end of the day, if there is a British interest or a European interest in the future of Egypt, it's in an Egypt which is a stable country, which has a strong economy. You sit at the crossroads between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, between Africa, Asia and Europe, and your country has so much opportunity going for it that we want you to succeed.
I love this statement that says, at the end, it is not the words of our enemies that we will remember, but the silence of our friends. And thank you for being a friend who is not silent. Because we do want, and let me say that I'm not only here to get your point of view across to Egypt, but the other way around as well. You were in Egypt, you met with the President, the Prime Minister, Field Marshal Sisi, but you haven't met that many people from down in the streets. Maybe you met few of the intellectuals. But we tend to say, we as a majority that was seen out on the streets, we are not being heard that well, neither in your media nor by the politicians. Is this like a point of view that somebody doesn't want to hear those masses, or is it just a misunderstanding?
Well, I think you have to be realistic. In that what is the Western media interested in? It's interested in something which they can put on TV screens, as you do, every night, which will attract people's attention. So just at the moment, everyone is interested in the fate of these several hundred Nigerian schoolgirls. Everyone has been interested, it doesn't come on our TV screens every night, in what is happening in Syria. In Syria, we have seen a violent breakdown in society where the government is holding on, but is being threatened by various groups across the country.
Right, and that means that this is just the news. But what about politicians? I mean, politicians do not take their information from TV, do you?
No.
You don't. You have reports, you read reports, you tend to know things about what's going on. This being the case, we know that the reports may tell you what do the Egyptian people, not all the Egyptian people, but the majority of the Egyptian people really want. You very eloquently said, not those who want to undermine the state. Because we know that there are some people who definitely want to undermine this. We see terrorism that's happening in Sinai, for example, and elsewhere. And that needs the backup of good people like you, yourself, and good governments like long-lasting relations we've had with the UK. How does it happen? How does it work for backing Egypt against this horrible terrorism that's taking place?
Well, I think we would stand ready to help Egypt in any way in which we can to confront those terrorists who seek to undermine the state. But I think you have to do something first, which is that you have to have a democratically elected president and a democratically elected parliament. And I think when that is in place, then the United Kingdom, and I'm sure the United States, Okay, I've got about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the bell. That bell means
I have to go and vote.
you have to go and vote.
Yes.
Okay, so that's democracy.
That's democracy. Sorry about this.
So between the bell ringing and our cut and our comeback, you have gone to do some democratic action. What have you done?
Well, we were voting on an amendment to a piece of legislation concerning the care system, whereby we in the Commons were telling the House of Lords that we didn't agree with them in the amendment which they had put into the legislation, so we've just taken it out again. So tomorrow the House of Lords will look at it and decide whether or not they're going to challenge us, but we are the democratically elected House.
Not the House of Lords.
Not the House of Lords.
Okay.
It's a revising chamber.
Okay. Looks like there is an underline here that's been put under a revising chamber.
Yeah.
Okay, back to you were talking about a democratically elected president and a democratically elected parliament. Let me start with the president. In the past vote for presidents, we had 25 million people voting for the two candidates where Dr. Morsi won at the time. If the turnout is the same, less or higher, does this signify anything?
Well, I think if the turnout is the same or higher, I would regard that as a victory for democracy and the democratic process, and a commitment by the Egyptian people that they want their will to be heard, and they want their man to be the president. It's not for me to predict who they will choose, but I would be a little concerned if the turnout was significantly lower than it was last time, because I think that for us in the West and in the older democracies to recognise the new president and obviously a new parliament, we would expect the majority of the Egyptian people to be behind the process.
But at the same time, we do understand that maybe in the last elections we had two worlds colliding in the finals, if we put it this way. That is the Islamists versus army and liberals on one side. This time it's liberals and army facing each other. So it's not, the challenge is not that big as it was in the past elections.
No, and I think that whilst I would regard myself as somebody who has faith, and that sometimes guides me in the decisions I take as a politician, that should not dominate me, and therefore an Islamist government and an Islamist president who wish to impose his will and his beliefs on all the Egyptian people is something which I think that we understand that the Egyptian people might at this time want to avoid.
Right. That brings up, before I move on to the parliamentary elections, which is a very important bit that I wanted to ask you about, a number of questions. The word faith, I mean, how did the West not see when the churches were burned and all this that happened in Egypt, and this was not a major alarm that something was wrong in our understanding of what happened? What happened then that made the West, including the UK, not understand that there is a big thing happening in Egypt?
Well, I'm not sure there was a total lack of understanding. I think we did recognise that the former president, President Morsi, was going beyond what we would regard as the normal powers of a president. The president should govern for all the people and not just for his particular group of people. You know, it was very much the dictum of the Soviet Union that you had a dictatorship of the proletariat, that once you gained power, it was a winner-take-all situation. I hope that the new Egyptian constitution will mean that it's not a winner-take-all situation. The president governs in the interests of all the people, and I think the West understood that, but we were concerned because a president had been democratically elected, and then the system seemed to break down, and we had invested, I think, quite a bit of political capital in the democratic process that Egypt had embarked on a couple of years ago, and therefore reluctant to immediately say, well, of course the army should come in and change it all. And I think, certainly in my conversations with Field Marshal Sisi, he was reluctant to move in straight away. I think he gave President Morsi a lot of advice.
And an ultimatum.
And an ultimatum, eventually, because President Morsi didn't take the advice which he was being offered by somebody who had been appointed by him.
Let me tell you honestly that on the 3rd of July 2013, that's the date when Field Marshal Sisi went out with the announcement, I was on air and I had guests and we were anticipating and waiting for what will Sisi do. And in fact, we were not sure whether something will come up, something will happen, or nothing will happen. Some people now say that they knew it was going to happen, it was definite, it was inevitable, but we were sitting there and we were not really sure that it was going to happen or an announcement was going to be made. But it was the violence that ensued afterwards. I mean, that was basically the eye-opener for many Egyptians who did not really believe, and I thought that it would be an eye-opener for everybody to see all this violence. Would we want to see violence like that coming back again? Would we?
I would hope not. I would hope not.
Okay, parliamentary elections. I mean, you're a parliamentarian. You're in the heart of democracy. You're in the heart of one of the world's biggest democracies. What would you want? How would you hope the parliamentary elections look like in Egypt that would make you say, well, I'm proud that this country I'm a friend of has a democracy like this?
Well, I think we want to see a range of political opinions expressed in the election process. This means that there will be a number of political parties. There will be political parties of the right who will want to see Egypt succeed as an open economy with business going forward, providing jobs for the people. There will be parties of the left who will have a more socialist mentality. But that's healthy for democracy to have these range of opinions. But I think the issues, it was Bill Clinton who used to say, it's the economy, stupid. And Egypt has some very real economic problems before it. And those economic problems can only be solved by politicians who are prepared to grasp the problems that you face, the problems of poverty, the problems of illiteracy. So it needs a party with a strong economic program, a strong educational program, who are prepared to work at it. My only concern is that the expectations of the Egyptian people are not raised too early, because whatever economic policy you embark upon will not produce miracles overnight. It won't remove poverty immediately. It'll be a 5, 10, 15-year process. So you have to have faith in your political leadership to be able to deliver that kind of new revolution, economic revolution, which I think Egypt desperately needs.
We're talking about different parties taking part in the parliamentary elections, and of course no one can deny that this is the healthy thing that should happen. But the Muslim Brotherhood has been deemed by the Egyptian courts as a terrorist organization that may not be taking part in that. So the fact that they do not participate, does this undermine the political process, the elections in any way, in your opinion?
No, I don't think it. If they have been declared as a terrorist organisation, that is obviously a decision that the Egyptian courts and the Egyptian people must take. It's not for me to cast a judgment on that. But what I would not want to see would be a situation in which those who may feel that their faith is their principal driving force, whether they are from the Islamic tradition or from the Christian tradition, that they should not be able to present themselves as candidates in these elections.
As individuals.
As individuals.
But I mean, if we're talking about the faith, like the Christian faith or the Islamic faith, I mean, the Egyptians are either Muslims or Christians, but at the same time, Egyptians at this stage, following the Muslim Brotherhood situation, they don't want the what you call Islamic politics or political Islam, or whichever way you want to put it.
That is what I think is now happening in your country. It is that people do not want that kind of political Islam. But that doesn't mean that you can't be a good Muslim and also be Prime Minister or President of the country.
I'm a good Muslim. I'm not running for president, but I mean, I can see that a lot of good Muslims, maybe good Muslims, and at the same time running for parliamentary seat, or good Christians running for parliamentary seat, but you do not have to you walk in and you talk about the Constitution rather than you talk about the Bible or the Quran. Do you agree?
I agree entirely.
Do you run things here by the Bible?
No, we don't. But there are decisions that come up, particularly decisions of conscience, social decisions. Mm-hmm. We've recently legalized gay marriage in this country,
okay,
so that people of the same sex can get married. Now, I regard myself as a good Christian.
Okay.
I oppose that legislation because I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman,
okay,
and it says that in the Bible. But nonetheless, I was on the losing side of that argument. But nonetheless, I think it was not illegitimate for those of us who believe in the Christian faith, and I think Muslims believe very similarly, that marriage is between a man and a woman. But you know, we've said it. It guided our judgment, and those who supported me, those who elected me. I had a phenomenal amount of correspondence, now of course through email and Twitter and so on, from my constituents, from my electors, supporting my position.
But that's it. You've just hit the point. You have, based on your Christian conscience, you've taken the stand, you've taken the attitude, and so you voted against. But then you said, and we lost.
Yeah.
I haven't read on the internet or anywhere in the newspapers that you tried to burn down the parliament because people have taken something against your Christian dogma.
Absolutely not. Absolutely
Would you
not.
do that?
Absolutely not.
But that's the whole idea.
This is the essence of parliamentary democracy. It is that you have the debate, you have the vote, and if you lose the vote, well, you move on, because that is how democracy works. Now, it may be at the next election that the electors say, but we disagreed with that decision. We'll vote for candidates who are stronger on this issue, and we might possibly get a change. But that is what democracy is all about. It's expressed through the ballot box. It's not expressed through violence on the streets or closing down parliaments or arresting members of parliament. It's expressed through the ballot box, and it's expressed on the floor of the parliamentary chamber.
Right. Let me move on to your role within Europe. Because you're not just a member of parliament in the UK, you're represented in Europe. Tell me about the movement on the European level. I mean, how does the rest of Europe deal with what's happening in Egypt? And I'm sorry that I'm maintaining most of my questions about Egypt, but we're trying to build this bridge. How does Europe, in your point of view, from the parliamentary life, look at Egypt at present? Is it different from the UK?
No, I think it's very similar. I was at a conference last week organised by the Council of Europe in Athens, which was looking at the position of Christian minorities in the Mediterranean region, which of course includes Egypt, and there were Orthodox and Coptic representatives at that conference. And I think there is a view in Europe that as we, in our democracies, whether Greece, where I was, which is of course like to regard itself as the oldest democracy in the world, we respect those Christian leaders, and we look across the Mediterranean to Egypt, and we would like Egypt to be a similar democracy in which there is freedom of religion, but that freedom of religion does not mean that religious leaders are able to dictate the politics of the country. And I think that in many European countries we have those kinds of freedoms, and we'd like to see Egypt having similar freedoms.
We don't want to be ruled in the same way you were ruled in the medieval times.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, there are a lot of contradictions in the British Constitution, the unwritten Constitution. You know, our head of state, Her Majesty the Queen, is the supreme governor of the Church of England. But she knows the limitations of her power, which are very small indeed in terms of religious faith. We leave it to the church leaders to run the church, and we leave it to the politicians to run the country.
That sounds very good. Those who run the church can run the church, those who can run mosques can run mosques, those who can run the parliament can run the parliament, and that's it, and everybody should know. But that's not written in the Constitution, that's understood.
That's understood.
That's understood. And will it ever be shaken, this very deep belief, will it ever be shaken by somebody who says, it is not written in the book?
I hope not. I hope not. I think that the way most of the democracies in Europe run, those who have written constitutions, those who don't have written constitutions, know that there is a distinction between religious power, religious faith, and political power. And political power is exercised by the people through the ballot box. It's not exercised in church or in the mosque. And I think if I can draw a parallel with what happens in this country, with what happened in Egypt in the last couple of years, is that the Muslim Brotherhood exercised power through the mosque. And I hope that your religious leaders, both Muslim and Christian, will not again want to see their institution being used to acquire political power.
Right. Are you meeting the foreign minister?
Meeting the foreign minister tomorrow, yes.
Meeting the foreign minister tomorrow. Okay, anything that you have in mind to tell or to talk about, or is it just a friendly chat?
Well, it's going to be a friendly chat. We will be interested in hearing his assessment of how the election campaign is going, how Egypt is moving towards its presidential democracy and then its parliamentary democracy. I have a lot of parliamentary colleagues who will want to question him, and I suspect they will want to question him about the recent trials and death sentences which have been imposed, which unfortunately I think in Western eyes have not been good for Egypt. And I hope that he and others will take on board that Egypt, if it wishes to be seen as a new country, as a new democracy, then the legal system, the rule of law, has to be on the basis of what we would regard as modern values, and not necessarily the values that appear to have been expressed in the judgments of those two courts.
But you are aware that if the foreign minister tried to interfere with the judicial system in any way, we, the people, will not allow him. We will ask for him to be sacked before he interferes with the judicial system.
I would not expect the foreign minister to interfere with the legal system, but I would expect the foreign minister to be sensitive to the views of those of us who are friends of Egypt, telling him...
We are all sensitive about that. We do understand. Not only the foreign minister, we do understand. But have you heard the comments made by Mrs. Ashton in Washington about that there is a misunderstanding of the judicial... Not that I'm defending the judicial system, because I don't need to, but have you heard the comments that there is a misunderstanding about the process?
Yes, I have. And I think that those of us in the West tend to suggest to ourselves that your judicial system is exactly the same as ours, which it's not. And we understand that it's not. But when you see literally hundreds of people after a very short court hearing, and many of them not present at that court hearing, sentenced to death, that does ring alarm bells, I'm afraid, in a Western liberal democracy, which has a judicial system, which until, only 40 years ago, could also impose the death sentence. We don't have the death sentence. Right across Europe, the death sentence has been abolished. And I think we would like to see a situation in which the death sentence was abolished in Egypt as well.
Altogether, so the alarming thing is not that there were 5 or 6 or 400, it's the fact that there is a death sentence to start with.
Well, I think there's a concern about having a mass trial of that nature, and a mass trial in which clearly most of those accused were not legally represented in that process. So there may be some work to be done in Egypt on the judicial process, but one hopes that a new parliament will be able to make that case to the government that perhaps it is time to look at the judicial process, to bring it more into line with...
we know that the death sentence is part of the Islamic rule. It's
Indeed.
a part of the Islamic rule. It's part of, in certain cases, not of course in all cases, but it's part of it, so that if you say I will abolish it, it will definitely be something that does not go in line with the Islamic rulings that in the new constitution as well have become also the background for any kind of judgment made by the constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So, still expecting it to be abolished?
Well, not immediately, I guess, but we would like to see Egypt move in that direction. I think the fact that you describe it as part of Islamic law, we could have described the death penalty here as part of Christian teaching, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, words in the Bible, which we have modernized. And it may be, not for me to dictate to you, but it may be that some of these Islamic teachings need to be modernized.
All right, I'm looking forward to see you in person again when you're in Cairo in June. You said you'll be in June.
Yes,
in
indeed.
Cairo. That's after the elections.
After the elections, yes.
And you will be meeting with the new president.
I hope so.
And you will be on Cairo 360 live when you're in Cairo.
If I'm invited.
You're certainly invited. I enjoyed very much talking to you, and I've learned a lot, and looking forward to talking to you even more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure.